is like, oh, you mean a place where I don't have to beat myself, work in the fields, where I don't have to do all that stuff I do. There's a place where I can rest that is designed by God, Sabbath, designed by God for our rest. Now, we in our vernacular wouldn't call this a Sabbath rest. That's a Jewish idea. We'd call it heaven. And he's going to actually make that connection today, okay? So there remains a Sabbath rest. And in chapter 10, he says you need to look forward to it. Let's hold fast the confession of our hope. The hope looks forward. Let's hold fast to that. Let's grab onto that, the confession of our hope, without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. That is, God's the one who promised the Sabbath rest. And he is worth our faith in him. He is faithful. He will do what he says. It's going to happen. And then most recently we saw this in chapter 10. He quotes from the Old Testament, yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. Well, faith is the question of the day today. Faith is always sort of forward-looking, but faith seems, if you're a Jewish reader here and you get to this point, you're thinking, okay, it seems like faith is central to me entering this Sabbath rest, this heavenly. It seems to be faith. Well, so what is faith? How do I know if I have faith? How do I have any examples of people who've had faith? Faith seems to be critical, and faith seems to be the heart of the new covenant. But a Jew would say, I'm not sure I see faith in the old covenant. I see people who would sin. They would do sacrifices in the temple or in the tabernacle. I see that all the time. I see the law of Moses. I see all this kind of stuff. But where's faith? Was faith ever a part of the old covenant, or is faith only part of the new covenant? And if faith is part of the new covenant, well, then it's a brand new idea. I don't know what it is. And that's what he's going to hit today. You're right. Faith is central. Faith is central to what we're looking for in all the first 10 chapters. Faith is central. So what is it? Do you have it? Give me some examples. So that's where we are today. So he starts off in chapter 11, verse 1. Very famous verse. If you know any verse from Hebrews, this is the one you know. 11:1. But remember, it's in the context of looking forward to the Sabbath rest to come. Okay? So faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Okay, it's some kind of, I know this is going to happen thing inside of you. A future thing, a time future thing. And it's the conviction of things not seen. So not only is it something that gives me, I'm persuaded, I'm set on this assurance of what's going to happen on the timeline, a future thing, but it's also in the now, it's a sense of what exists that I can't see, but it still gives me some kind of assurance, some kind of confidence. So if you contrast these two things, I've often contrasted these and thought of them like this. The one on the left, it's really faith. Faith sees the promises of God coming to their fruition. Faith looks at the promises God makes, and we look and we say, I have an assurance that that's going to happen. Now, faith has an assurance that the promise will happen because I have an assurance about God's character. So really, you can't have an assurance about God's promise unless you really know who God is. And I would propose that if you don't feel like you have much faith, it may be because you don't know God very well. Or you don't know his promises. Those two go together. So that's what he's starting off there on the left. Faith sees those promises. And you can live by sight or you can live by faith. And what he's proposing here is that faith is another kind of sight. It's a sight that looks down the road, sees the fulfillment of the promises of God. A faith that looks up at the invisible God, puts those two together and say, that will happen. And that's what he's been talking about through all of Hebrews. And this other one, that's conviction of things not seen, I always lump in this idea that faith sees the presence of God because God is invisible. So you see his hand in everything that goes around, not only in the present, but in the past and the future. That's the invisible that faith allows you to see, but God in all your conversations. So that's faith. Still seems a little vague, doesn't it? It still doesn't answer the question, do I have faith? How do I know if I do have faith? I sort of get what you're talking about, but I'm not sure. The silly example I use about faith is about asking a 14-year-old on your street to take care of your dog while you're on vacation. Now, you know that 14-year-olds are not always very reliable, very faithful. So your confidence, once you leave town, that your dog's not going to be dead when you come back. Your confidence that everything will be fine is based on your understanding of the character of that guy, right? And so if you worry as you're on the road, you think, oh, I don't know about my dog. Maybe, you say, wait, I can stop my worrying because I understand him. This kid's good for it. He'll do it. And I have confidence in that. So you see how the connection between understanding the confidence on someone who makes the promise and the reality of the future are tied together. That's exactly what we're talking about here, but in a much bigger sense with God. Okay, and then he nails this down for those who don't think they see it in the Old Testament. Look, verse 2. For by it, faith, the people of God receive their commendation. Wait, you mean like all those Old Testament people did faith thing? It's not just a new covenant thing? It's actually an old covenant? Yes. Wait, hold on to your horses. Before we actually get to this parade of people he's going to prove to us have faith, so we understand better what faith is all about, we need to look at this word commendation. This word commendation. When you get a commendation, it's a very public praise is all it is. Like you get a condemnation from your job, from your boss, or if you're in the services, you get a commendation. It's not just a good job, well done, pat on the back. It's a public proclamation of praise. That's what it is. Now the question is, if the people of old have received their public proclamation of praise, who's doing that praising? Is it the people or is it God? Hold on to that question because we're going to test this as we go along. Because this word will be used nearly half a dozen times in the chapter we're going to look at today. Plus, you know what this word is in Greek? Martyreo. Martyreo. Well, you mean they're all going to die? No. That's the twist we put on martyr. The word martyr just means testify or witness. It means witness. So if you go on the witness stand in court, you are a martyreo. Is what you are. You're a witness. So martyrs are witnesses, but in our vernacular in English, they also die. And that's not really the heavy point here. So what he's saying right here is that these people who have used faith, have faith in the past, they have received a public proclamation, a witness, a testifying in a public way about something about them. And I think it's coming from God. You see if you really think the same thing. Here we go. First, before we get into that parade of people, he's going to give us one example of this, seeing the presence of God. Here's a really great short example, then we'll get into the parade, okay? A nice short example is this one, he says. Here's a good example of faith. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by God. Except he doesn't say that. I blanked out the words just to mess with your heads again. I mean, that would be an okay statement without those words I've blanked out, right? By faith, we know that God created the whole place. I look at the place, I go, well, faith gives me an assurance of what I can't see. I was not there at the creation, but faith tells me, poof, God did that. Faith tells me that. However, that's not exactly what he's saying right here. Faith gives us not only just the understanding that God created it, but that he created it how? By his word. And to nail home that you didn't miss that point in his statement, he says right after this, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Well, what gives you that understanding? You weren't there. Faith gives me that understanding. So in order to start his parade of examples of faith, he goes back to before there were even any human beings, at the creation. And we can actually have an assurance that that's how God created the place because faith tells us that. I won't get into that. That's a detour. But here's what's interesting. When it comes to speaking and reality happening, God is the only one who can do that. Interestingly enough, in the newest embracing of science of the Big Bang, you have to take that with a grain of salt a little bit. However, the stating science, the objective observations of the present and over the last 3 decades, undeniably, this is actually in a realm of science I didn't know a lot about when I was in school. But the idea is that when you look at the heavens, you see an evidence of a very large explosion. And as a result, it turns out that the universe has been changing. So if the universe has been changing and has been expanding, then if you turn the dial backwards, it started. Now, for most scientists, up until 20 years ago, they would fight to the death and say, no, the universe didn't have a beginning. The universe always has been eternal, has always gone on. And when Carl Sagan had his show called Cosmos, he would start the beginning of the show by saying, the universe. I can't remember how he says it. The cosmos always has been, always will be. Well, no. When they embraced this science of the last 20 or 30 years, they looked around and said, psst, the universe had a beginning. Yeah. Yeah. And the reason that science was resistant to admitting that there was a beginning to the universe is it sounds a lot like Genesis 1. It'll give all these creationists this fuel. However, they have finally and, resistantly embraced the idea that the universe had a beginning. Now, where it gets kind of dicey scientifically is what happened at that singularity, they call that, what happened there and what caused it, because we all know that everything that exists had a cause. So if there was nothing before the universe existed, what caused the universe?
The Word of God.
God. In the beginning, God. That's why I just laugh out loud when I think about this. However, this is the amazing thing. God did not scrape together some pre-universe elements, stir them in a pot, chuck them out there and make stars. The raw material for the universe was his word. Wow. Which is really, it's really emboldening when we talk about faith. Because remember, we're talking about looking forward to a promise that God has made for this Sabbath rest, this great place will be. Well, if his word is good enough to creating the universe when he speaks it, because it's going to happen because the stars happen, if that's the kind of relationship between his word and reality, then when he says that's going to happen, then that's going to happen. Amen. I mean, that's just the way it is. So this is where he starts his definition of faith, so you understand. You got to understand. You got to understand. God made a promise to that, and God spoke his word, and the universe existed. It's as concrete as the sun is when it comes up in the morning. It's going to happen. That's his first argument. So let's go off and look at some examples of people. Remember, he said, for by it the people of old received their public praise. Here we go. On your mark, set, go. Abel. How old is Abel? Who were the first two? Adam and Eve, and they had Abel. So we're going back at just about as far as we can go, okay? Abel. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, his brother, through which he was publicly praised as righteous. God publicly praising him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. The sacrifice of Abel still speaks, even to the point that this guy's writing this right now. There's faith. There's faith right up there, right Adam and Eve and Abel and Cain. Faith is there. It's not just a new covenant thing. While we're there, Enoch. Enoch is the son of Cain, I think. Someone check me on that. I'm pretty sure that. Cain's son. Someone check. Very early. I've forgotten right now, but he's very early. By the way, there's a couple of Enochs in the Old Testament, so you got to make sure you're looking at the right one. But we're going way back.
Yeah,
that's a different Enoch. Is Enoch the son of Cain?
Enoch did have a son. Cain was his father, but it's a different Enoch. It's not.
Okay. Here we go. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. So, yeah, there is an Enoch. I should have looked this up. Genesis 4, I think, right?
Yeah, Genesis 4 speaks about Cain giving birth to a son named Enoch, but in chapter 5, the descendants of Adam, Enoch year after is a descendant of Seth.
Seth. Okay. Check it out. I should have. It's in Genesis. We're still back in Genesis. But if you remember this Enoch, the description of what he's talking about here is very short. It's like less than 2 sentences, maybe 1 sentence, which is Enoch lived for a certain amount of time, 365 years. The only reason I remember that is because that's how many days there are in a year. Yeah. Anyway, Enoch lived for 365 years, and then he was gone. God took him. Couldn't find him anymore. He's gone. And so what he's saying right here is that Enoch demonstrated faith. Because of his faith, God took him. He was not found. But he was commended as having pleased God, and that's why God took him. So let's look at that for a second, because he introduces an interesting concept right here. Having pleased God, having pleased God, which is it's an interesting reading into the life of Enoch, but faith is central to it. And this is what he does kind of as an included thought. He says, verse 6, while we're on Enoch, let me just say this. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. It's impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God, and by the way, Enoch drew near to God, God took him. Whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So this is his little teaching on faith as he goes through these parade of characters, because he'll do this a couple times. This is a really good one, because remember our definition in verse 1 that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, right? Well, it's right here in this verse right here about Enoch. Look at the last thing. He rewards those who seek him. Well, that's a future event, so that's the assurance of things hoped for. And then back up a little bit, you see it's you must believe that God exists. Well, who's invisible? God is. It's conviction of things not seen. See, this is fun. Okay, let's keep going. Noah, by faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. And by this, he condemned the world. You remember, that was the way that the world was served notice, by the fact he was building the boat, and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Noah. Keep going. You know Noah really well. How about Abraham? Now we're moving forward in the story. We've made it as far as chapter 11 of Genesis. This is going to take a while. I hope you don't have plans for lunch. Here we go. Abraham, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. So remember that? He lived in Ur the Chaldees. Ur is present-day Iraq. It's the Mesopotamian Valley. It's a wonderful place. At the time, it was the most developed place on the earth. I always call that area the New York City of the world. I mean, it was civilized and buildings. I mean, it was well developed. And he just got up and left because God said go. And Abraham says, where? Well, up someplace. But it'll be a great place. And I'll tell you when we get there why it's such a big deal. But in faith, he actually relied on God's word and went to a place that he had no assurances about except by the assurance of his faith. Big, big deal. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Heirs with him of the same promise. So he's talked about this promise here. This promise, believe it or not, is a long-range promise of the Sabbath rest for the people of God. There's a long-range promise that in mankind can find real life in the presence of God. That's the promise. And it was a promise that was also shared with Isaac and Jacob, it turns out, the sons and the grandsons. So by faith, he went to live in a land of promise, as in a foreign land. I mean, how many of you, if God showed up at your foot of your bed tonight and said, you need to get up and move to Tremonton? No. Or some other detestable place. Now, what if he said to go someplace and you had no understanding of the place? I mean, it's just a place that's totally foreign to you. I mean, totally foreign. And you say, well, okay, and you go. Based on what? Well, based on the promise of God. Based on the fact that there's life there and God's taking you there. A lot of us have made moves like this in our lives. And it's not that foreign to us, where we're in a place where then we're comfortable in the place. We know what's going on in the place. Everything's just fine. Thank you, God. Don't move me from this place. And then somehow he says, yeah, but you got to go over here. But I don't know anything about that. I can't tell you, God, whether that place is better than my current circumstances. So why should I go? I mean, give me some assurances. And you say, God, give me some assurances. Tell me what life's like there. And you hear nothing. So then you're stuck. Do I take God at his word? Well, if you have faith, then you know the character of God. You know that he loves you. You know that he's smarter than you. You know that he's wiser than you. You put all those things together and you say, well, if his word says go, I guess I'll go. Literally, that was my thought process with Dorothy when we moved here. But God, Utah. I don't know anything about Utah. Well, except that there's Mormons. But I don't know anything else about Utah. I mean, why would I go to Utah? Everything is just fine where we are. And so God had to blow up even that statement because things didn't suddenly become fine where we were. And he got us here. But by faith, we came. And let me just say this. I'm so thankful we did. I love this place. I love you guys. Okay, let's get off of Abraham. Oh, there's more about Abraham. 10. When he was looking forward to the city that has foundations. He came from the city of Ur, which was the New York City of the world. And he's looking for a promise from God about a city that has foundations. And when he says foundations, he's not talking structural stuff. He's talking about a place that's grounded, that's real, that can't be shaken. A promise of a city that has foundations. Like Ur, but better than Ur. Okay? A city that has foundations, and in case you don't know what he's talking about, that's the foundation, whose designer and builder is God. He's looking for a place that's founded by God, that's intended by God to bring us life. That's what Abraham was looking for. Let's talk about Sarah since we're talking about Abraham. Verse 11, by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Now, she didn't really accept that promise at first. You know, there's a little balking, there's a little chuckling in behind the tent flaps, stuff like that. I mean, she was not totally, but eventually she was. And she said, well, look, I'm barren, have been barren my entire life. Now I'm way up in age. God says I'm going to have a baby. Yeah, right. Well, okay. Faith takes God at his word about what's going to happen in the future. That's faith. So that's Sarah. She had faith in that. Therefore, from one man, talking about Abraham, well, we should count Sarah in that because they're one flesh. And him as good as dead were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Wow, I'm sure glad they had faith. Yeah. By the way, that list in the bottom sentence there includes us. Yeah. Move on. A little inclusio in the middle here where we reflect for a second, since we've gotten all the way up to chapter 11 and 12 in Genesis about the faith of Abraham and Sarah. Look, he says this. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised. Did Abraham and Sarah receive that city that has foundations? No. Is God a liar? Is their faith poorly placed? Listen, he says, they all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. The eyes of faith allow you to do that, to look out and realize God's promises and say, that's the direction we're going. We just haven't gotten there yet. They saw it from afar because of faith, because of God's promise. And also, an important point, having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. They realized that this is not the final place. We are strangers and exiles on the earth. And in order to reinforce that with Abraham and Sarah, man, they lived in tents for all that time. They were strangers and exiles, not only in the desert of what was that day Canaan, but they were strangers and exiles in the earth. And for us to recognize the promises of God in terms of that Sabbath rest, we have to not only believe the promise, but we have to unplug from here. We have to realize that we're strangers and exiles here, that this is not the end. Yeah. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they're seeking a homeland. They're seeking a homeland that's founded on God's promises. Strangers, aliens, wandering, temporary, tents. I'm looking for a homeland. And so what the writer of Hebrews is saying is that they're looking for a home that's founded by God himself. That's heaven. That's the Sabbath rest for the people of God. That's the promise realized. They're looking for a homeland. But they wouldn't have put those words on it. All they know is they're looking for a home, and God had promised a home. And that's where they were aimed. That's where they were aimed, and so that's why they left home. If they had been thinking, we're still doing analysis on Abraham and Sarah, if they had been thinking of that land from which they'd gone out, that's Ur of the Chaldees, they would have had opportunity to return. They're looking for a home, but they realized that's not their home. They left that place. But as it is, they desire a better country. Yes, that is a heavenly one. See, here's where he makes the connection that the Sabbath rest for the people of God, the promise of life with God himself at the end of the age, all of those things, that better country is the heavenly one. That's what we would call heaven. That's what the Jews would call the Sabbath rest for the people of God. It's the promise of realized life with God in community. a better country. That is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God. Now, hold on to your seats. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. So that thing over there, that's the fulfilled promise of God, the Sabbath rest for the people of God. That place, that heavenly one, is a city. It's a city. It's a city. It's civilization in the midst of wilderness. It's the only place where you can find life. You got to think like an ancient person at the time, and you can be like this sort of today if you drive across some of the most barren parts of the United States, for instance, and that's not Tremonton, by the way. I mean, but if you're just out in the middle of nowhere in Arizona or New Mexico or wherever, I mean, it's just, yeah, name your least favorite state. I'm hearing them all over the place. But you know what I'm talking about. You're out there and you're driving and just nothing. I mean, nothing. And when you finally get to not just a little burg, but like a city, you go, oh, they've got gasoline and Costco. I mean, does life get better? Right? So that's our stupid, weak, first world. But this is the idea here. During the ancient times, when you were out in the middle of the nowheres, like the Saudi desert and stuff, it was nowhere. I mean, it was just nothing. There's no life here. You can't make a life here. So what he's saying is that God's promise to us is a place where we can find life, a place that he's designed, a place of order, a place that includes you, right? I think this is amazing. If people have ever asked you what heaven's going to be like, my fast response is, it's a city. It's a city? You mean like buses and dirt and rats city?
And also big
no.
Maddox.
It's got Maddox?
Maddox too.
Oh, we don't want to do ads right now. That's okay. But it's a city in terms of a place where you can find water and food and people to care for you. In the ancient times with the Israelite, they were commanded by God to be hospitable. Because one time you were strangers in Egypt, so you need to be hospitable. So it's a place you can find hospitality. I mean, you can find life. You can kind of settle down. Know that you're not going to die tonight because you don't have food or water or bed. You have protection from the wild animals and from the thieves out in the alley. I mean, it's just like, So the best way that the writer of Hebrews could give you an understanding of how great this place is that God has promised us is to say it's like a city. Yeah, a good city. Yeah, life. Yeah. What's heaven going to be like? A city. And with this idea of a city, it also not only brings the idea of protection from wild animals because you got a wall around it, you've got order because you have people who are enforcing the law, which wasn't happening outside the wall. There's possibility for food if you don't have food. People will be kind to you. I mean, all those great things. In addition, a city strongly implies that there will be fellowship between the people who live there. There will be community. And so when I think about the promise of God, I think about the fact that it's not just us sitting on clouds strumming harps. It's a place of community with God at its center. Now listen, that's a great thing. That is a great thing. Can I tell you much more about that? Not too much. Although someone said that city might have streets paved with gold. Who cares? It's paving material. It's the asphalt of the new age. It's like, no big deal. But there will be God there at the center of it, a city designed by him, who's founded it by him, who includes many of his creation like us there, and we will find community and the presence of God. It sounds awfully good to me. Well, that's what Abraham and Sarah were looking for. Let's pick up Abraham's story a little bit more. 17, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He received the promise of the offspring, but he's getting ready to kill his only offspring. Who does that? Well, faith says, God's got this. I may not be able to put this together in my head. I may not be able to see the outcome of this, but I think God's got this. And so the writer of Hebrews, he kind of helps us get through that cognitive dissonance. He says, look, Abraham considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. I mean, he was as good as dead until God interceded. So that's the kind of faith that really is astonishing to us, that he would say, God's going to give you a nation, people that come from you physically, but you're going to kill your only offspring. That doesn't make any sense, but God's got this because he wouldn't ask me to do something that violates his promise. Well, God's just going to bring back from the dead. We're okay with this. Isaac, grab some sticks. Let's go. Oh, gee, really? That's why Abraham is put as kind of the pinnacle of faith. I mean, he's Mr. Faith. The things he did, leaving home into a nowhere land, even sacrificing Isaac, even the whole prospect of the fact that a whole nations will come out of your offspring. I mean, these are all things that are totally unseen and are totally in the future. But Abraham said, well, okay, faith. Well, let's move on. He had Isaac. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Remember that blessing scene? And you can go look that up for yourself. Also, Jacob, speaking of which, 21, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. You can go look that up yourself. But Jacob knew something about the future of Joseph's sons, that he blessed his sons. That's really sort of fascinating because he doesn't really do that with any of his other grandsons. He knew something. Speaking of Joseph, by faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. Now, this is really quite an astonishing thing. Because if you read all of Genesis and all those chapters of Genesis, and you get down to the very last words of Genesis, there's Joseph. Remember, it's a pretty good time because Joseph is like the CEO or the CFO or whatever of Egypt. I mean, he's a very highly placed, second only to Pharaoh. And the Israelites have come there to take refuge, and everything's hunky-dory, and it's just fine. And Joseph is in a great position to help his family and to bring life. And I mean, it's just really a great story. But at the very end, then Joseph says, well, you know, our presence here in Egypt is a great thing. And God's done a great thing through me. However, a day is coming when God's going to come to you and take you out of here. And when he does, take my bones so they're not buried here. What? In the midst of that great living situation, which, by the way, went on for centuries after that. A day is coming when God's going to come and pull you out of here. Go check it out. It's in the last handful of verses in Genesis. And so he says, when God does. Well, how does he know that's going to happen? How does he have an assurance that's going to happen? Bing! Faith. He knew that was going to happen. So when you do, just make sure you kind of pick up my bones and take me to the other place. And when you read the story after that, that's what they did. Yeah. Joseph, how about Moses? You know, we're skipping a lot of years now. 400 years. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Well, no, that's not actually the faith of Moses. It's the faith of his parents. But I mean, they kind of smeared off on them. But they knew something about the fact that Moses needed to be saved. And so they decided, instead of killing the baby, which was the law, they decided to hide him and then to kind of launch him into the Nile, and we'll see what happens. But by faith, they knew that was a good thing to do. Also Moses, by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Remember that? I mean, he grew up in Pharaoh's court. But then a time came about, you know, are you going to claim that and entrench yourself in that? But he chose rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. See, he could have stayed in Pharaoh's house, but in order to free God's people, which God had called him to do, he said, yeah, I'm not going to be identified with Pharaoh. The house of privilege. I'm going to go with my people who are persecuted. And for him, faith told him that was the thing to do. 26, in further commentary on that, he considered the reproach of the Messiah greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Now, reproach is when people say nasty things about you, maybe even hit you. He's saying he considered the nastiness of being identified with the Messiah to be a greater wealth than the treasures of the court of Pharaoh. Privilege or becoming a victim. And he chose the victim because it was identified with the Messiah, who was the king who would be in charge of that place. Remember, that's the idea. He was looking for the reward. He was looking to the end of the promises. He was not looking at just Egypt and Egypt alone. He was looking for something far beyond that. A little more about Moses. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Now, that's just a great lie. He knew that when he took his people out of Egypt, man, Pharaoh's going to get mad. Well, he was pretty mad when they left. In fact, he was stunned when they first left because of the dying of the firstborn. He was stunned. But then Pharaoh said, wait a second, we let them go. Let's go get them. And they go after them. It made Pharaoh really angry when he kind of woke up from the stunning of all those plagues. He was not afraid of the anger of the king. And why? Because he endured as seeing him who is invisible. There is a greater king, God himself. Well, how did he know that? Bing! Faith. Evidence of things unseen. There's faith in Moses. There is faith in Moses. Yes. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. God said, do this. You will not be touched. And he says, okay, I'll take you at your word. That's what faith does. Okay, let's move on. All of Israel at that time, verse 29. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land. Yeah, they said, okay, we'll do that. But the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same thing, they were drowned. It does take a certain amount of faith that even though you see God part the waters, I see Cecil B. DeMille when I do this. And then you look down there and you think, and we're supposed to walk through there? What happens if whatever is holding the waters back decides to kind of let go? I mean, we're toast, or we're fishes, or I don't know what we are. Anyway, this is not going to work well. It takes a certain amount of faith to walk off the shore and to walk into that thing. The only thing that reassured them a little bit was the fact that it wasn't muddy, it was dry. It was dry, and so they walked into that. Without faith, the Egyptians tried to do the same thing, and sure enough, the water did crash on them. Yeah. So they had faith to believe that God was going to protect them while they were walking through the Red Sea. Israel also, verse 30, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. We've also done a big time lapse right here. So we're up to Jericho. And what's the faith there? Well, God said what you need to do is go out and parade around Jericho, 7 times. He gave them instructions about what to do while all the taunts are coming off the wall. But they said, well, okay, God said do it. That's what we're going to do. I'll take him at his word. I have faith in the character of who God is and what he's asking me to do. I'll just do this. And sure enough, we know what happened. While we're talking Jericho, let's talk about Rahab, the prostitute who lived in a little condominium in the wall of Jericho. By faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Now, why in the world would she ever do that? When you read the story, you go, man, I don't know. Impeccable morals? Well, now that she's a prostitute, there must be something else going on. And she actually tells us. She says, we have heard what your God has done up to this point. And so I choose to believe that your God is the God of the universe. So I'm going to participate with that God. And so she allows the spies to be there. She welcomes them. Rahab. Yeah, we love Rahab. Okay, what more shall I say? Time should fail me to tell of like Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets. It's like he's saying, look, I decided to start at the very beginning of the annals of faith. We went to Abel and before the creation of the universe, but I've just run out of pen ink and I'm out of gas. If I could keep going, he says, these are the guys I'd cover. And I look at that list and go, yeah, why didn't you cover them? Yeah, Gideon, there's a man of faith. Barak, yeah, there's a man of faith. These are all during the Judges. Samson, he's kind of a mixed message of faith. Jephthah is just a mystery to many of us. You go back and read about Jephthah if you don't know why I'm hesitating a little bit. Jephthah. David! Why didn't you start with David, man? He ran out of pages. Why didn't you start with David? And Samuel. Oh, Samuel. And then all the prophets that came after that. Elijah. What the heck? What you left? He just ran out of pages. These people, through faith, they conquered kingdoms. They enforced justice. They obtained promises. They stopped the mouths of lions. Oh, maybe we're talking Daniel. Quenched the power of fire. Escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong out of weakness. They became mighty in war. They put foreign armies to flight. There's a lot of crazy, cool, positive things because of faith. Because they had evidence of the unseen God in their presence. Yeah, this is quite a positive list about things that God does through those who have faith in him. But now the tide turns a little bit. Women receive back their dead by resurrection. That's pretty cool. Okay, that's a faith thing. But some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Refusing to accept release, which means these people voluntarily submitted to the ongoing torture. Why? Well, I'll let you go if you say Jesus is not the Son of God. I'll let you go if you say that the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not the creator of the world. I'll let you go if you actually deny all these facts that you seem to embrace. And you can walk out here today. I'll open the door, let you out, undo your fetters. You're out of here. What do you say? Stop this torture. Stop this pain. And you're in control of that pain. Just, deny those things. They refused to accept release so that they might, why? Rise again to a better life. And here again we have faith talking about this better life that still is to come. And they said, okay, even if I lose my life in the middle of this torture right now, not that big a deal. Yeah, my existence in this world comes to an end, and this age comes to an end. But there's still a much better promise coming. The city of God. See, the city of God. So it allowed them to stay in that situation voluntarily. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment for their testimony, their martyreo, their witness of who God is. And then it goes on and says, they were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword, they went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. I mean, these are people whom the world was not worthy. These are quality people who embraced the truths of who God was, who embraced their faith in who God was and his promises. And this is what they suffered as a result. So that first list that we had is great stuff. Mighty things happen because of the presence of God. But also we have cases here where now they have to ask themselves, am I willing to give up my grasp on this world for what's to come, for the promise of God? People of whom the world was not worthy. I mean, many of them wandering about in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. I mean, they were homeless. They had no place to be. They had no homes. Because they were looking for the home that's promised in the city of God. So they said, even if I give up this place, that still exists and you can't touch that. And all these, though publicly praised through their faith. And we just did that. We made a list of them. Publicly praised by God through their faith. Did not receive what was promised. What's the deal? They're putting their faith in God and God is not coming through. Well, that's because that promise is still over there. There still remains for the people of God a Sabbath rest. It's still to come. They didn't receive what was promised since God had provided something better for us. Something better for us. That apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Now, perfect is not sinless. Perfect is at the end, at the completion of what God's plan is for them. It's when it's done, it's at the end, and when everything is finished. So what he's saying right here is God didn't bring to them the fruition of that promise back in that day because that's still to come. And God didn't want them to get there before we got there. So he implies very strongly that we will all get to this fulfilled promise at the same time. God didn't want to kind of do it for them. And we say, hey, that's not fair. I thought you made that promise to me, and I'm after that promise. Well, the promise is still to come. That's what he's saying. And it's a better place. So that, if God had done it earlier, apart from us, they should not be made at the end of the plan. And they're not. We are all not at the end of the plan yet. That's still to come. That's what he's saying. Okay, we're done. You realize we just read the entire chapter 11 together? Oh, I guess I read it. You just watched. So here's the question that bugs us at the end of this. So why did they willingly submit to this abuse when they could step out of it? You and I can step out of future persecution if we just deny who Jesus is. And what that does, all that does, is it prolongs our stay here in some sense. But if prolonging our stay here is that important to us, maybe we've lost sight of the fulfilled promise of the better to come. And that's what he's trying to play off here. Faith, what it does, faith is it removes our eyes and our expectations on the here, and it starts to transfer us to the promise fulfilled. Now, interestingly enough, even in the present, the promise is beginning to be fulfilled because God has already called you the temple of God and he's dwelling inside of you. And there's already community in a sense among us. It's like that city of God in its fulfillment has been started to be sculpted right now. God is in our presence. God is in us. We have community. We have a city in a sense. We have a community. But there it will be fulfilled beyond your wildest dreams. So why did they willingly submit to this? Only one answer: the promise made by the Creator. The promise is what got them through that. They placed their expectations off of this place, so you called yourself a stranger and an alien here, and I'm a citizen of that city that's to come. The promise: there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. That's still to come, the writer of Hebrews says. And that's just a great idea. Paul said it another way in 1 Corinthians 2. But as it's written, what no eye has ever seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. You don't have a clue what this fulfilled thing is going to be like. We know it's going to be good. We know it's worth leaving here for. And we know that his promise is good and he's faithful and it's going to happen. If his word created the universe, his word will create that promise be fulfilled. But you haven't got an ounce of a clue about how great this will be. Many times, when I'm in situations where I think, life's getting pretty bad now, or things are going south, things aren't going where I expected them to go, I replant my faith in that promise by reading this. I haven't even got a clue what that's like, and it will totally eclipse in your memory this. Totally eclipse it. Our Phyllis, who we're going to do this thing on Saturday, she had this down cold. She had this down cold. She says, I'm done here. I really am. But that's not really the point. That's what I'm looking forward to. That. Yes. Jesus himself said even that this is not the final place. My kingdom is not of this world. So if for Jesus this isn't the place where we find our end, well, then it shouldn't be for us either. Right? I mean, his kingdom's not of this world. And then earlier he said to the apostles, look, if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come again and I'll take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. That where I am, you may be also. That's the biggest and best part of the better city. Hey, Jesus is going to be there. God himself living in our presence. Yeah. That was only hinted to in Hebrews by the shadow of the Old Testament where God says, make me a tent, put it in the middle of your camp. I'll be with you because I want to be with you. Sorry you can't come near. You got a problem of sin, but I want to be in your midst. I want to go where you go. I want to be your God. Come on, let's do this. They built him a tent. He camped in the center of their tents, and they wandered in the wilderness with God delighted to be in their presence. Yes. So all of this, the promise is cemented by the fact that faith allows us to see the promises of God. In some really strange way, we can see that. We see that coming. The eyes of faith allow us to look way beyond our circumstance. And not only that, this faith that he has given us, this has come from God, allows us to understand and sense the presence of God in this moment and all through the journey to there, and even in that fulfilled promise. Assurance of things hoped for. Evidence of things unseen. We'll close with this, because Paul's prayer to the Ephesian church was that they would fully understand, they get this. This was in his prayer. This is an opening prayer in his letter to Ephesus. I'm praying that you may know what is the hope of which he's called you. What are the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints? He's talking about that promise fulfilled. I'm praying that you get that. Now, it was timely for Ephesus because they were on the cusp of some extraordinarily bad persecution. It was coming within a decade. And it would persist for 250 years for those who profess Jesus. And it continues to this day. Without question, the single most persecuted group of people in the world are Christians. It's just not covered very much. I have a friend who writes a newsletter out of Sandy, Utah, and all he does is he scours the news reports about the persecution of Christians, and it's horrific. It's horrific. And it doesn't get the general press because the general press would rather believe that Christians are evil. So to call them the most persecuted class doesn't fit the narrative. But it's real, and it's happening a lot. Persecution of Christians, Jesus said, come on, don't be surprised by this. If they hated me, they're going to hate you. That's the way it works. So for the church in Ephesus, which was a very cultish place, spiritually speaking, their persecution was just starting. And he says, but I want you to understand, in the midst of all these declining circumstances, I want you to understand, I'm praying that you will know what is the hope of which he's called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance of the saints. I want you to know where you're going so you won't get too stuck in the presence that's going down the toilet. I want you to know where you're going. That's the only way that you'll be able to make it through these times of trouble if you just keep an eye on what God has promised. This is not the end. There's much better coming. The best is yet to be. So take your hands off this place. I'm going to close with a quote from Clive Staples Lewis in Mere Christianity. By the way, if you haven't read Mere Christianity, you really ought to. What a great book. What a great book. Oh, what a great book. But this is what he says about how we think about the future. If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, well, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. And we are. We are made for another world. Jesus, as he prayed for his apostles, said, I'm sending them into this world. But Father, they're really not of this place anymore. They're of that place. They're of that place. Okay, so next week when we come back, we're going to be starting in chapter 12. He's going to ask a great question. Therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, these are all the people we just talked about. So, now before you go and satisfy your curiosity about what he's calling us to, what would you say? So he just paraded in front of you all these people of faith, people who demonstrated that faith was the operable characteristic of those who put their faith in God from the very beginning, even back to Abel. It's not just a new covenant thing. So we have all this parade of these people that you all as Jews have admired for all of these years, the heroes of faith. So once you know all this stuff, so what about you? So what do you do after this? And that's what he's going to launch into, something extraordinarily practical. You can read ahead if you're really curious. 12:1. Therefore, since we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, we should. Now, we will be able to identify with their circumstances because we are increasingly not like this world. We're increasingly not of this world as a result. And we are increasingly longing for a home, a city designed, built by God, a place constructed for fellowship with him and fellowship with one another. That's the home that we continually have our hearts bent toward. And when you lose sight of that promise and the one who's faithful to make it happen, you start to get mired in the muck of this place. Now, I'll just put in a P.S., the muck of this place. God has left us here, you know that. You do know that when you profess faith in Jesus, he could have popped you out of here like Enoch, and he could have slammed you into the end of that. He could have put you over there, and we'd say, amen, thank you, God, for getting me out of this muck. Man, and I got to tell you, I pray this all the time. God, this would be a good day. Let's do the Enoch thing so people look for me and I won't be found and I'll be over there. I'm ready. Let's do this because this is really tiresome. So is there a purpose for God leaving us here? Well, yes, because he could have moved us. So he does have a purpose for you being here. But you just said this isn't the end. I mean, this isn't the fulfillment of life itself. This isn't the fulfillment of the promise. This is a temporary thing. Yes. So you put all that together, you realize that God has a plan for you now. Just don't get stuck here. Keep your sights there. If Christ is there, keep your sights on where Christ is. But he's also here in us. And there's a purpose for us to be in this mucky place for a while. And that purpose is partially your sanctification. And in terms of your realization of how infused with sin you are and God's dealing with it, and your increasing appreciation for his sacrifice and cost and his patience for you. I mean, we will indeed understand God more and more as we stay in this place, in contrast to not only the sin that's in us, but the sin that we wade in. That's a great purpose. However, beyond you and beyond the benefit to us, and there is a benefit to us, beyond us, there's a great benefit to the people who don't know about that. About that. And God's using you to give people an understanding that that exists. Did you know that God loves all these people so much that he gave his only son? Whoever believes in who he is won't perish, but have that. Do you want that? So there is a dual role we have in being here. Even though this is a temporary place, partially for our change, which brings us to a deepening understanding and appreciation of who God is, but partially that the world may know that there's a promise that exists. A city of God. Now, when you fast forward into Revelation, what's at the end of Revelation? A city. Is that just the most beautiful thing ever? There's the city of God. And he calls it the New Jerusalem, the new place where God has founded. Okay, I got to stop oozing. We're going to sing this because he's the one that we praise for this tremendous plan. He's the one that drew us into his plan. He's the one that gave us faith to put our trust in him and to put our trust in his fulfilled promises. He's the one that's done all this. He has called you to himself. So we don't praise ourselves for being insightful to choose Jesus. We praise God that in the face of our sin, he said, I want you there. So unlikely. So we praise Adonai. Okay, let's pray. Father in heaven, these truths are too big. Lord, I feel so inadequate to even partially communicate how big this is. And yet, I do know this as a simple person, and speaking on behalf of a lot of simple people in this room, we understand that you called us to yourself, and you called us to community with yourself. And you called us to a future that we can't even start to imagine. But we do sample it right now. We do taste it right now. We taste your presence in us. We taste the goodness of good in contrast to the muck of evil that we find ourselves in. God, we taste, and we start to get hints of the great glory of what that day will be like. So, Lord, I pray that through your Spirit living in us, you would continue to disconnect us from this place, not be irrelevant here, but be used by you temporarily in a powerful way, not only to change our understanding of you, but to bring this message that there is a city, the city of God that's coming, that you can be part of. God, we just pray that you would use us in those simple ways, and that as our words find trouble even trying to comprehend and to communicate the greatness of what this is, just like Paul says, I mean, no eye seen, no ear has ever heard what we're talking about. This is beyond anything we can even conceive or imagine. God, I pray you'd make us lights in a very dark place amongst the people that sit in darkness and the shadow of death, who have no hope. Lord, I think of whole segments of our society that are overwhelmed with suicide and hopelessness, wondering if there's a point to it all. And so, God, we realize that you've sent us into this so that we can be a testimony, a witness, a martyreo of your plan for mankind, if we'll only put our faith in the Son of God. So use us powerfully, we pray, in these few years that we have, and pray that you would glorify yourself and draw many to yourself because of us. And then, Lord, we hold our breath and we wait for the great city. Thank you for your love for us. In Jesus' name, amen.